I'm always willing to try to learn so I can become better at who I am and who I want to be and strengthen my own strengths. Hopefully, work on some of my weaknesses, but not being afraid to admit that some things I'm not great at, and that's okay. So, again, just I put a lot of pressure on myself to be willing to learn, but not to be the absolute best, but just be willing to learn so that I can be a better version of myself tomorrow.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam, and on this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and how they became the person they are today. One of the coolest things about the Gen Z generation is that this generation wants to be known as the generation that inspires people. And I love being around people who want to inspire people, make someone's day 1% better. But when it comes to inspiring people, we can't just focus on all the good things because it's true. All these amazing people have accomplished a lot of things in their life. But we also need to talk about the good and the bad because these stories are what make people human beings. And that's what I want to do on this podcast. I don't want to talk to them for who they are. I want to talk to them for what they are, which is a human being. And just let human beings simply be known for being a human being. So I hope that you as a listener are inspired by their stories, but also being okay to talk about your story because sometimes we don't like talking about it because out of fear of judgment. But I want to let this podcast be a place where you can just be a human and talk about your experiences. So I hope you continue to support this podcast, whether it be past, present, or in the future. Now, my guest this week is Francesca Reicherter, who is a mental health advocate and founder of Inspiring My Generation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to suicide prevention through mental health awareness, emotional support, and education. In 2021, she published You Are Not Alone, a workbook, as a guide to help readers build a coping toolbox. In 2022, she published I Am, an interactive workbook to help the reader build the tools needed to advocate for mental health. She also hosts the podcast Normalize The Conversation, where she amplifies voices of mental health professionals, advocates, and any individuals interested in sharing their story, which I will highly recommend you checking it out. I have listened to some of her conversations, and I'm a little jealous because she is a much better interviewer than I am. But her work, with her work in mental health, she has been widely recognized in national publications such as New York Weekly, LA Wire, Chicago Journal, and awarded one of the top 10 most powerful women of 2021 by Yahoo Finance. Please welcome Francesca Reicherter. Francesca, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much for having me. I love that introduction. And I love the fact that you are creating kind of like a space where people who are doing great work, who are accomplishing things that people may look up to in some way or another, to actually just be human, right? To go through the bad and the good, because life is not what it looks like on social media. You might see all the good things that are happening in our lives all the time, but you'll see how much like blood, sweat, and tears goes into each of those like celebratory moments. So I love what you're doing.
Oh my gosh, and it means so much to me because I have been checking out your podcast. It's one of the podcasts I listen to whenever I'm not studying other podcasts or listening to other guests. And I'm just like, I wish I could have your confidence because, I've maybe talked about this in the past, but I usually get nervous because it's more about like trying to have the best conversations possible. Look, it's only from the outside, so I don't know what's going on mentally. But like whenever I see you and talking to all these amazing people that you've talked to, I'm just like, how is she? She just seems so natural. So it's so cool to be able to interact with a fellow podcaster.
Well, thanks. And for me, my secret is that I'm very, very outgoing and love to talk. I love to talk about myself. I love to talk about mental health. So having a podcast is like the perfect outlet for me to combine both of those things, talk about myself, talk about mental health, talk to people, and make new friends. So it might seem natural, but that's just because that's my personality.
I love to see it. I definitely want to talk about the podcast, but firstly, I want to talk about how you are a mental health advocate, and I've talked I've asked this question to almost every mental health activist, and I think it's really important because oftentimes people think that because you're a mental health activist, that means that you don't necessarily deal with issues. Like, let's just say that in a broader sense. But in reality, you still have the same feelings that other people may be experiencing. And I want to talk about the relationship you have with yourself specifically, because when I met with you, and I'm not saying this because I have to, I'm saying this because I want to, you are one of the most genuine, nice, supportive human beings. That's something you love to be known as, just someone who wants to make someone's day better. But what we don't often see is the relationship people have with themselves, right? Like, what is Francesca Reicherter like with without podcasting when she's specifically by herself? So I want to ask you, how would you describe the relationship you have with yourself? Because I can't imagine it's like 100% happy, 100% unhappy. It's more of like maybe it could be 50-50, it could be one is more than the other. What does the relationship look like when with yourself when you're just by yourself and not doing anything with your business or podcast?
That's a really great question. And it's something that I've been exploring a lot lately about myself. I go through phases where sometimes I am genuinely so happy and content with everything in my life, everything going on, and I'm feeling confident, whether I'm in front of a camera or not. And there are times when I just feel so defeated or hopeless or overwhelmed, like nothing is going right. So I can say for the last 60 days, and 60 is the exact number. I keep a track. I have a whiteboard in my room, and it does say days, and I count how many days that I've been feeling content, that I've been feeling like, okay, whatever comes at me, I have the coping skills, I have the tools I need to get through, that I'm not falling apart every day. So for the last 60 days, my relationship with myself has been pretty great. There's moments where I'm alone and something starts to feel sad, but I allow myself to feel it. And then I allow myself to encourage myself to get through the day and say something kind to myself. I love saying kind things to myself. I write notes for myself on my mirror almost every day. It's one of my favorite things to do. I guess I just love supporting myself and encouraging myself. So right now, my relationship with myself is just one who's constantly cheering myself on and encouraging myself through those harder moments. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and it's funny because I was reading a book the other day. I forget the name of the book, but the person was talking about how it's okay to have bad days. It's okay to have those feelings of, oh, I'm not 100%, or like those negative thoughts in your head. But what's really important is to not let negative thoughts overcome you to the point where now that becomes your identity. So kind of what you just said about how saying nice things to yourself, as awkward and cringy it can sometimes be, because it's like sometimes we have those moments where we like to say negative things more often than positive things to ourselves. So once we develop that habit of just saying positive things, no matter how small or big the impact is, we want that to overtake the negativity. And I don't want to say paralyze. I can't think of the word at the moment, but it's like just constantly tell yourself that you are enough and that you are good and that everything is fine. Sure, you're gonna have your negative moments, but just try to focus on the positive. And once you do that, it makes you feel better about yourself. I know that kind of botched that up, but just think about what you said. It just reminded me of something about how like it's okay to have bad days or bad moments, but don't let them overtake you as a person in general.
Absolutely. And on that note, one thing that's really worked for me is, well, first of all, that note, right? Just saying like, you're enough. You can do this. You're going to get through this. I know for me, if I don't believe it in the moment, telling myself is not going to make me suddenly believe it, but reframing the negative thought to some kind of encouragement. Because going from a negative thought to a positive thought in my brain is so difficult. But if I can go from negative to encouragement, and with enough encouraging thoughts, I start to think more positive. So if I'm feeling like super hopeless and like I'm not doing anything, I'm not helping anybody, I don't want to be here, I quit. When I get into those kind of mind spaces, something I love to tell myself is, look at how far you've come. You've grown so much over the last few years. Literally 4 years ago, you were in a psych ward and didn't want to be here. And now maybe today you are questioning if you've done anything, but you've made encouragement cards and sent out 11,000 of them to people. You've created a conversation for so many people on a platform. You've created workbooks. You've been by your grandmother's side. You've been there with your brother, your friends through these difficult moments. Like, you are helping so many people every day, whether or not you see it. You're doing your best, and I'm proud of you. I may not think I'm amazing after listening to that, but I'm like, wow, yeah, I've done things. I've grown in some capacity. I've made some kind of impact. I'm getting there. But if I'm feeling completely hopeless and I'm like, you're doing great, I'm so not going to believe it. But breaking it down for myself, like, be honest, I don't feel great right now. But these are some of the things I've been able to do. And I know that I'm helping people. And that's okay. And that's great. And celebrate it, but not make a big jump. For me, those big jumps just don't work. But that piece of encouragement helps me take one step up the ladder.
It reminds me of how people will often say, don't focus on going from 0 to 100, focus on going from 0 to 1, because that's a manageable goal. And it makes things much better. Of course, you're going to have difficulties, but I mean, especially like because we focus too far into the future, because the future has a lot of unknown, it's like, don't focus too far, just focus on what's ahead of you and try to overcome that. Smaller goals are much more effective than trying to solve big, like, I guess, longer goals, just because they're more manageable. And management is really important. I know that because I think you're a business major, so it's like managing things is much better. Managing things short term is much better for you in terms of like your mental and physical health than like what's gonna happen like 5 or 10 years from now. So I think that's it's really important at the end of the day.
It is, and being able to break it down day by day. I know for me, like this morning, I was looking at my to-do list of all the things I need to do. And I was like, wow, I'm overwhelmed. Right off the bat, 6 a.m. this morning, I was like, wow, I can't do this. Going for a run. Like, I need to calm down. I'm lying. I went for a walk. I don't actually run. I wish I did, but I don't. I run my mouth, not my legs. So I went for a walk. And then I came back and I was like, okay, let me figure out 3 things I can do today that make me feel like I took a step forward, that I can check off my to-do list because it'll make me feel good to check it off. And it's reasonable for me to do, and break things down into steps, because even one day can feel so overwhelming. So if you can just find small things you can do every day, whether it's for yourself, whether it's for someone else, whether it's for school or work, whatever it is, just small things that you can do to take that step forward, and breaking it down into tasks instead of into big goals.
One of the things I want to talk about when it comes to relationship with yourself is, I think we have a couple of things in common, which is, one, we love talking to people. We have our podcast, we have our own podcast, but you growing up you focus a lot about trying to, you struggled with the idea of whether you're good enough. And you're very hard on yourself. I think I saw somewhere, maybe you need to correct me on this, I think you finished college 2 years or something like that.
Yeah.
um, and I think it's really cool it's great that you are hard on yourself in the sense that you care. But I do wonder, like, when you're struggling and going through those stages in your early on, when you were talking about you were not good enough, who do you feel like at that time, and maybe even now, who do you feel like is your biggest enemy? Do you feel like it's maybe like the evil side of you, or who were you trying to prove? Because again, it's not like a bad thing. It's just a sense of like, sometimes when you're growing up with the sense of like, I don't know if I'm good enough, and whatever that may be, sometimes it's like, I need to make sure that I impress these group of people or this specific person to make sure that I am actually good, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I think, of course, one of my biggest enemies is myself, because it's really my brain. And it's all the things my brain is telling me, like, you're not good enough, you're not doing enough, you're not trying hard enough, you failed, all those thoughts that happen. But I think, and something that's probably very common with a lot of people, is wanting to make their parents proud, or their grandparents proud, or their siblings proud, right? I wanted to make my family proud. And it's not that they specifically said, you need to get straight A's, you need to be at the top of your class, you need to do all these extracurriculars, you need to be whatever. It was this idea in my head that one time they celebrated me when they did well. So it's like, okay, now I need to always do well because I want them to celebrate me. And then it kind of just escalated in my head to, I just want to make them proud. So I need to do the best at everything, be the best at everything so that they're proud of me, when in reality, they're proud of me just for waking up today, like genuinely. But I guess it's something that not that somebody put on me, but that I created in my head and projected onto them. And then I was trying to live up to this idea that I created for what I want them to see. Does that, does that make
Yeah.
sense the way I
No,
explained that?
yeah, it's because I was thinking like that's exactly I struggle with this. It's like it's what I'm putting in my head, but then also how I grew up. Because in my community, so as someone who's South Asian, they love talking about people, like parents love talking about their kids. So they'll be like, "Oh, my kid is married," or "My kid is an astronaut," or not astronaut. "My kid's an engineer." "My kid is in computer science," or "They are going to this amazing school," or "They're getting all these opportunities." And so they love comparing their kids. And so in my mind, I remember going, okay, I'm thinking, okay, I gotta impress them. And not because for them, but so then my dad or my mom can say, like, oh, Hamza's doing so and so too. And so that creates a level of pressure because it's like, because, and I'm not saying it's a bad or a good thing. I mean, if you are around smart people or doing great things, that's a great sign. But it's like because of the pressure that they might be putting on you, maybe not directly, but indirectly, that causes a lot of anxiety. And sometimes I do put a lot of pressure on myself because there will be moments where I might think I'm doing good, but then I'm like, but am I doing good? I just had a conversation with another person I interviewed. She has her own podcast as well, and we were talking about like how sometimes the simplest of things gives us the most anxiety. So it's like you might think you're fine, but then there's like something inside you going, you might need to check because there's something you did wrong. And I found that like I usually fall into that issue where because I find like if I have to check again, I did make a mistake. So now I'm like, oh, I'm really stupid. So my enemy is myself because I'm like, I do end up making a mistake, but then at the same time, because of how I grew up and the people I surrounded myself with, it definitely adds more pressure. So definitely those two things um kind of make kind of like this that's how I feel about like making a point to someone is like myself and showing and proving that like how do I try to be positive even if I make a mistake, but then also trying to prove to others that I'm also smart, for lack of a better phrase.
I get that, especially in like the academic setting, right? Like, I mean, you're constantly being given tests to see if you're going to make a mistake. Literally, that is the academic environment. So when you want to be essentially perfect to show that you're good enough, to show that you are smart enough, like we genuinely think that we need to be perfect and get hundreds to be smart enough. And that's a ridiculous idea. Because if you get 100 all the time, like, wow, like genuinely, wow, celebrate yourself. You're amazing. I freak out anytime I don't get 100 and it's like the end of the world. I thought I failed the test. Okay, didn't think I failed. I thought I got like a B. And I called my friend afterwards crying hysterically like the world was ending. The world was not ending and I ended up getting an A. Still thankfully because I don't do well with not being perfect, something I'm working on. But in the academic setting, right, it's so conditioned in you that you have to be perfect. You can't make a mistake. And you make a mistake, you're wrong, you're dumb, you're not smart enough, right? And that mindset is so hard when that's what you grow up in. And then one day we're supposed to get older and be imperfect humans as we all are and make mistakes and not internalize it as I'm not enough or I wasn't smart enough or I did this wrong, right? Just because it's kind of ingrained in us from the age of what, 4 or 5? How old are you in kindergarten? When they're like, get all the questions right, color inside the lines perfectly, just all these expectations and messaging we're telling kids.
And here's the thing. So if anyone's listening on audio, Francesca, I just want to like for the record, and I'm going to assume this is the case. Francesca is not South Asian, But I will say, I will say that like if me and Francesca grew up in the same community and Francesca was the type of person that got all A's and was doing all these extracurricular activities and then everyone started talking about you, I would probably just flee the country. I would be like, just get away from this as far as possible. I'm not trying to be compared to Francesca. But um, speaking of, oh, I don't want to say speaking of comparison, but one of the things I talked about in the introduction is talking about how even though you have a lot of good things going on and amazing things, there are also difficult challenges. And um, one of the people that you almost dedicate your entire mental health advocacy is your uncle, who passed away a few years ago. And I'm always curious about learning about what a person is going through when they lose someone close. Because like especially when it's like the last few days and I'm seeing all the relatives, they seem jolly, they seem happy. And then I've been to a couple of weddings recently where I would see um relatives or like people who lost someone close and they look like they're doing fine, but I don't really know. So I know your experience can be different for a lot of people, but I do want to know like how were you able to get through each day? Because when you lose someone close, forget all the other difficult challenges you might have. Getting through each day is probably one of, if not the most difficult challenge for people who are going through that time. So what allowed you to keep going even though it was such a difficult moment for you?
I love that you asked this question because for me, I had no idea how to get through it. Like, genuinely, I had just lost my grandfather 2 months before that. I just graduated my undergrad, and it's like all these big life moments happening, starting my master's program. And then the person I had attempted to end my own life a month before, and the person who helped me 27 days earlier ended up ending his own life. And boy, did my heart shatter. I had no idea how to grieve, how to cope, how to take care of myself. I was drowning myself. And suddenly I had to cope with the person who was there when I needed someone not being there anymore. I ended up in a psych ward, to be honest. I did. And I got introduced to therapy and different therapeutic modalities that helped me. And I started talking about it more openly. I remember writing my first blog again, post psych ward, and explaining what happened to me and what I was going through. And then continuously engaging in conversations, like being honest, I'm struggling right now. I don't know what to do. His birthday's coming up and I want to celebrate it. But I just also feel so sad by it. Like, what can I do? And asking other people what's helped them. So I think for me, what really helped and still helps me get through those difficult moments is community, is reaching out to people, being so honest with what I'm feeling and what I'm going through, and seeing what's helped them and giving it a try. Being willing to reach out for help, that's a big thing too. Going to therapy, I went to therapy 4 times a week. I really needed support and I was very willing. No, my dad was very willing to sit there and take me for a while. Then my younger cousin came with me and she would sit outside waiting for me to finish therapy. And these people just showed up for me and made sure that I didn't feel alone in it. So I can't take all the credit or really any of the credit. It's all these people in the community around me that helped me, as well as my willingness to just be honest and ask questions.
For sure, community is so important, and I don't know why I keep making this reference, but it just does pop up in my head. But it's like it's almost like Wizard of Oz in the sense where you're going through this journey by yourself, but then over time you find people who I guess are going through something difficult in their life, maybe not the same, but still a challenge nevertheless. And just seeing that they're going through something too. And so it's like it's not to make, I mean, it doesn't solve all of your problems, but it makes maybe your problems less worse because now you guys have something, you guys have both, you're both are going through something, but you're going to be able to overcome it together. And having at least one person is better than going through a journey by yourself. But you mentioned being in a psych ward, and I think, well, if you don't mind me asking, I know you said you're not South Asian, but I do want to ask, like, what is your, if you mind me asking, what's your background?
I am Italian and German.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's cool. So actually, I have a friend from Italy, so that's really cool. So I want to ask you, like, when it comes to mental health and just going in a psych ward, if you told people that you were going through this period of time, I know in South Asian cultures, if you say that, they'll think you're crazy and then they want to stay away from you as far away as possible. So, and I don't know how Italian and German cultures handle mental health, but like, were you looked at differently? Was it something where when the moment they found out that you were going through this, they were like, okay, we might need to stay away from you as far away as possible? Did you ever get backlash for admitting that you're in this? I want to ask you, what did being in a psych ward help you in your personal life? But first, I want to address that part of the issue, because when you say that you have mental health issues, especially, or something going on in your mental health, especially if you're growing up in different cultures, they have different interpretations of it, and sometimes it's not the most helpful way.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very traditional Italian, like old-fashioned Italian culture, and it was just like be strong, don't talk about it, get through. And I think for the most part, that's kind of the mentality everyone around me had, I'd say. But after I ended up struggling and ended up in a psych ward, we had just lost my uncle a couple months before to suicide. So I think everyone in the family was already like kind of forced into exposure of what a mental health issue and trauma and situation and struggle may look like in some sense. So when I started struggling and ended up in the psych ward, I think everyone went into survival mode and they all just wanted to be there because they didn't want to lose me too. So they all showed up for me. I had one uncle, my Uncle Mario, who would bring me books to the psych ward like every day, a new book. I'd read a book a day. Then when I got out, he would basically babysit me all day. He would take me to the gym with him, take me to get breakfast, take me over to the beach to go for a walk, or to just like hang out, to go get an acai bowl, whatever it was. Like he essentially did not let me be alone at all. And I was so, so grateful for that. So most of my family really jumped in that survival mode. We're not going to leave you alone and you're going to get through this. I'd say I did have one family member who pulled away. And I think that was the hardest because there was someone I was extremely close to. It was like, I can't be around this. And that really, really hurt me for a long time. And I think it's something I recently actually got over, maybe like a year ago, that I was like, no, I get it. Like they needed to take care of themselves. Like they were struggling too. Like that's terrifying. It's terrifying when someone you love has ended their life or has tried to end their life. Like, and if you don't know how to cope with that and you need space, that's okay too. So it took me a long time to realize that it wasn't a personal thing, but it was them going into survival mode in the way that worked for them. But for the most part, I was very lucky at that point because, again, everyone had just seen what happened with my uncle. So they were in like that reactive, like, let's just save her kind of mode. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I love about my parents is that they focus not only on the physical health but also on the mental health, which is vastly different from the people that in like not everybody, but like a lot of people in the South Asian community, when you say like, oh, I'm going through something right now, I'm not 100% right. They're like, oh, we might need to stay away from you. So I'm glad that you have people who support you, especially family, because that's important. So I want to ask, in that case, with experience in a psych ward, I often feel like you can always find the positive in the negative, and even though you're going through a difficult time, you can always find something to take away from. So I want to ask you, what are some things you learned that helped you improve as a person while being in a psych ward? Because even though it may not be the ideal situation, I still feel like I said, in any experience, you can always take some positive, even in the negative.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that being in the psych ward was kind of a reminder of the 12-year-old inside of me who started a blog and wanted to have these conversations. That's actually why the name of my nonprofit's Inspiring My Generation. It's the name of the blog I started when I was 12. I just wanted to be part of making a difference in the world. I loved Oprah. I wanted to be just like Oprah. And yeah, that's what it actually says in my high school file. Fun fact, wants to be Oprah Winfrey. My guidance counselor hated me. She was like, give me a real career path I can write down. I was like, Oprah Winfrey. But anyways, back to the point. Um, it just reminded me of who I always have been and who I always wanted to be when I saw how many people around me were struggling and how I wasn't the only one, but how many of us felt like we didn't have a voice anymore, that no one was listening, or that we were ashamed or feeling guilt. There were all these different emotions that we were all feeling, yet we were afraid to talk about it. And I so badly wanted to kind of be a voice for those who lost theirs, who people just couldn't hear, who were barely hanging on. So for me, the psych ward was a reminder, like a wake-up call, I guess, of who I've always been and wanted to be. And I guess I lost that for a while. So the psych ward helped me find myself again.
I love that. And yeah, I do hope that you get to have a career similar to Oprah Winfrey's, just because, guys, I'm not even kidding. Francesca is one of the best Gen Z talk show hosts of all time. I just want to put that out there. um, Speaking of inspiring my generation, I love the name because it clearly it for me it seems as though you really want to inspire people, and just try to find the best version of themselves and making sure that they're taken care of, not just physically but mentally. And you talk about how you want to be the best person possible, the best mental health advocate possible. And I feel like, I know it's just a name, but sometimes names have meaning. And inspiring my generation, like when I think of that, I'm like, I wonder how much pressure you're putting on yourself, because as cliche as it sounds, it's still a pressure that you put on yourself because you want to be the best version. So I know we talked a little bit about the relationship you have with yourself, the how you grew up thinking you're not good enough, but you're trying to prove to yourself that you are good enough. As a mental health advocate and the founder of Inspiring My Generation, how much pressure are you putting on yourself to be the best founder, activist, and person? Like, tell me through what's going through your mind when it comes to that question.
I'd say for me, the biggest thing is I want to be the best I can be as me, right? I don't want to be the best. I mean, I would love to be the best at everything in comparison to everyone. Like, don't get me wrong. I would love that. But realistically, I'm not. Like, there's always gonna be someone out there who's better than me in something. That's great. Like, everyone has the unique talents and things that they can add and value. So for me, it's become a lot of being the best version of me possible instead of the best at everything. And shifting that mindset's really helped me. But I definitely put a lot of pressure on myself to constantly learn, constantly be willing to make mistakes and own up to it. I think for a long time, if I did something wrong, I would get like defensive. Someone would correct me. And now I'm like, no, tell me. Like, tell me. If I get defensive, like, call me out on it too. Like, please tell me so I can grow, so I can learn. I'm constantly willing to learn and ask questions. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I will ask you a million questions a day. And it's probably best to not give me your phone number because that's what's going to happen. I'm always willing to try to learn so I can become better at who I am and who I want to be, and strengthen my own strengths. Hopefully work on some of my weaknesses, but not being afraid to admit that some things I'm not great at, and that's okay. So again, I put a lot of pressure on myself to be willing to learn, but not to be the absolute best, but just be willing to learn so that I can be a better version of myself tomorrow.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, and it's weird. Like, I am struggling with this concept where, like, when it comes to growth, I think of it as the worst thing, as sometimes like the worst thing in the world, because it's like, no, I'm right. But then sometimes you need to take as much time as you need to understand the full truth. And then that's where I realized, oh, maybe I should have approached this differently. Maybe I should have taken this as a chance to become better. And so I want to be at that stage where I want to be okay with accepting criticism, because, and obviously I'll accept it later on, but I want to accept it as soon as possible so that you handle the situation better. But it is so difficult because you want to, like, for me, I almost feel like I want to be the best, because if you are the best, then people respect you. But oftentimes it's the one that is maybe, I don't want to say not the best, but they're like, I want to learn more. And if you're around those people, then it inspires other people to learn more. And I know that's a broad subject, but when you're around people that want to continuously try to push each other to be better and to learn, then that's how you become a better person. So I think for you, or for me, and I don't know, maybe this goes for you, like, that's why, like, with this podcast, I want to be around people that encourage me to be 1% better. I don't think of it as I want to get to 100%. It's like maybe get to 101%, get to 102%, because that 1% better mindset can help you. Even if you know something, there's always something you can learn. And I know, like, sometimes I will read a book more than once, like the same book more than once, but I'll always find something new to learn. And so just having that willingness to just learn something can definitely make you a better person, and not and take away the stress of becoming the best, because it's a great feeling to have, but at the same time, there's always, even the best have something to learn. Like you're not finished with life. If I don't know, I feel like that was a dark way of saying it, but like you're not, like, there's always something to learn. You're not done at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And, going back to that, like wanting to be the best, to have people's respect. Recently, I had a mini argument with someone who was like, I want people to respect me and to admire me, look up to me, and I just want to be successful. And they thought the best way about getting to that was like not having empathy for people. And I was like, why not? And they're like, empathy is a weakness, right? Like you have to just always be able to make the hard decisions. And I was like, hey, I get where you're coming from, but I think what people respect the most is authenticity, integrity, honesty, loyalty. So switching from this idea of wanting to be respected for being perfect or assertive or cold or whatever the words we want to use are, but being respected for just being yourself and showing up as yourself. Because when you show up as yourself and you are offering light and joy and value and happiness, people are going to want you to be around more. And respect follows that, right? And people want to be in your presence. They want to learn from you. They want to ask you questions. They want to spend time with you. They just want you around. And I think that, this idea of like, would you rather be loved or feared? Right? It's like, I'd rather be loved for who I am than feared for someone who I had to put a mask on to be.
Yeah, and I want to touch on the empathy part, because that's what I love about my podcast, is seeing people as human beings. And yes, it's important to, um, yes, you have your own priorities, but, and especially if you need other people to help you, they might be going through something. And just because you're not going through it, it doesn't mean that you should ignore what they're going through. And so being around people who respect you as a human being, rather than just treating you as like, well, I don't have this problem, so why should I care? Um, as long as if you are able to treat others as human beings and understand that they are going through something, then people want to be around you more. Um, and that's and I want to transition slightly to the entrepreneurial side of you, because you are the founder of Inspiring My Generation. I mentioned you have a business background in college, and I think some of the things we talked about is really, really important, which is, being authentic, trying to understand people, that they are not just employees, or they're not just workers or whatever. They're humans that are going through something similar or going through a difficult path. Um, we talked about how you don't have to be the best, or that your mindset should never be to be the best. It should just be to always learn. And so you might have answered this question, but I do want to ask you, like, what are some other things people need to know when it comes to being an entrepreneur? Whether that be with the dirty work that comes into play, like all the finances and all the stuff, or just a mindset in general, because I feel like anyone can be an entrepreneur, especially, regardless of what you do, but it's also important to have a healthy mindset. And healthy meaning, like, how do you overcome those difficult obstacles? Not all the great things will come your way in the future.
Yeah, I'd say one of the most important things I've learned is that it all starts with a purpose and a vision. Anyone can be an entrepreneur, right? If you have a purpose and you have a vision, that's step one. Step two is being willing to take some risks and put yourself out there, but making sure those are risks you're able to take, right? I'm looking at it and seeing financially, am I in a position that I can make this happen, that I can risk it? And if I am not, what do I need to do? What do I have to fall back on? But not letting that deter you from trying, but making sure you have the tools and support system around you. Because entrepreneurship is isolating, right? It's lonely because you're in it on your own in the beginning and you're trying to figure it out. And when it's your purpose, your passion, your vision, and it's all you, when it's not going well, right? When it's taking its time to work, it's hard to not internalize it. But on that note, it takes time. It takes time to figure it out. I don't think any entrepreneur went into business knowing what they were doing. I don't think any of them knew how to set up payroll or bill hours or figure out funding, figure out the best way to do marketing, figure out their profit margins. I don't think anyone went in with every single tool they needed to do it all. Maybe they had some of the tools. Absolutely. Maybe they knew perfectly how to interview people and how to find the right people for the job. Maybe they didn't. You don't have to know everything. You just have to be willing, again, to learn, to be the best version of you that you can be, and be willing to recognize when you need to delegate out, when you need to ask somebody else for help. I am not great with accounting, but accountants are. So I am going to delegate to an accountant who's willing to work with the nonprofit, work within our budget, and who connects to the mission and wants to be there and support. So knowing that you don't have to know anything or everything, just take it one step at a time, being willing to learn, being willing to ask for help. I think that's like the theme of my life, always being willing to ask for help and to continue to learn and grow.
I learned the other day, there's a difference between acting fearless and acting foolish. And you obviously have to, like, sometimes we care so much about being the hero. That's why, like, I don't want to say it's the same thing as being the best, but it's like, let me do it. I can handle everything. And if you don't have a plan, then your plan is going to fail. But if you have a plan, sure, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, but if you do get to a situation where the things don't go your way, then yes, then it's better to ask for help. But if you go into something without really any idea, then you really do look stupid. And so I don't know if that really aligned with everything you just said. I just thought that as you were talking, I thought that's really important because, why should you play the hero? You can also be the hero by asking for help. You don't have to do everything all at once. You can get people along the way that can help you. And you mentioned, like, you're not the best at accounting, but you can always find people who have experience in it, and you can still be the hero, but also in a way that accountant can be the hero. So I guess trying to work on a more collective goal is much more fulfilling and rewarding as opposed to doing it on your own. As great as it is, and I'm sure that there are people that can do that, I think any entrepreneur or anyone who's creating something special will tell you that they didn't get to a specific point or place without help from other people, whether that be with their entrepreneurial side or just the personal development. Like, kind of like what you mentioned, like how when you were going through difficult times in your life, you didn't go through it alone. You had family and friends that helped you become the best person you are. And I'm sure you still have it. You still have that today.
Yeah, I think that, again, being willing to ask for help and knowing it's okay to not know everything and to go into it just with that passion, with that purpose, with that vision. It all starts there, because if you don't have a why, when it gets tough, it's hard to keep going, right? So always starting with the why. I think that's a book by Simon Sinek that I read. That is why that always comes to my mind, but start with the why. And then being willing to ask for help, because you don't need to know everything. You may not know. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea. I bought a book to learn how to set up a corporation, how to file for a 501c3, how to write bylaws. Bought a book to learn that. Then I tried filing my own tax stuff and realized I needed help. Reached out to someone, spent way too much money to find out that they did it wrong, and have to find someone else to help me. But I didn't necessarily know what I was doing in any way, shape, or form. I just looked out for resources. I bought books. I listened to podcasts. I looked up interviews with people. I asked questions. I reached out for support. So again, I think that support piece, whether it's from another human being sitting in front of you or next to you holding your hand, or if it's from listening to a podcast where people are giving advice or talking about what they went through, or watching videos on YouTube. I mean, or TikTok or Instagram Reels, wherever you get your content from these days. There's so many resources out there. So never letting a lack of knowledge per se in the sense of not knowing what to do stop you, but being willing to look out for the knowledge, being willing to learn, to ask questions. And if it's not the right time for you, admit that too. It's okay if you start and you're like, you know what, this isn't the right time, and pick it back up years later or never pick it back up. It's okay if it's the right time or not the right time. You're willing to give it a try right now, you're not. But that fear of not knowing what to do, don't let that stop you. Find resources, look out for resources, reach out to people. That support system, whether again, it's a person literally physically sitting next to you or someone on the screen in front of you, support's out there to help you reach your dreams as long as you have that why. I think that really helps.
I want to transition into the podcast because you mentioned a bit about how you would listen to other podcasts. Let's talk about your podcast and normalize the conversation. And one of the things I really think, and I know maybe that's just because I'm very hard on myself. I like to say everyone else is better than me. Of course, you are a much better interviewer than me. But one of the reasons why I say that is, the two things that we have, or one of the things we have in common is we want guests to just be human beings, being authentic and honest as possible. And for me, sometimes it's like it takes me a while for people to be as honest as possible. But for you, I feel like it's just like the moment you start recording, they're able to show their true selves. And the reason why I say that is I think the first question you ask each guest is, how are they how are you really doing? And that's where people, and as cliche as that question is, because I think that's a question everyone asks, what do you think it is about you? And I know maybe people are hearing you for the first time, but and I encourage anyone who's listening to go check out her podcast, because like the moment they start talking, it's like, oh, look, they're human. What do you think it is about you that allows people to be as open and honest as possible? Because you can't just force them to be vulnerable. You really have to let them, you really have to show people that, even though your podcast is about being authentic, it's like you can really do that, because it's not easy. So I'd love to know, what do you think it is what do you think you have that allows people to be as honest as possible when it comes to talking about how their day is going? Because it's not just like, yeah, I'm doing well, wink, wink. It's like, no, I might be going through something.
I think it's being interested in their response, right? Actually wanting to know the answer. I think how are you's become such a greeting, right? It's like, hey, how are you? And you keep walking. Hey, how are you? And don't even look up at the person, it's just like that's something that's become so ingrained in our society. But I genuinely want to know. I want to know how you are. So I always start with, before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really? And I think that people just know I care and I want to know and I want to be there. And you can say, I'm great, and I'll celebrate that. Say, right now, life's difficult, and I'll get there with you too. And I'll sit there and listen and offer some kind of support, whether it's maybe something that's actually helpful, or maybe it's just a listening ear and to know that you're not alone in it. Maybe it's some validation, whatever it is, just wanting to know the answer. And I think that hopefully that's what, I guess, my personality and the way I show up and the way I ask the question is presented to people, and that's why they're willing to answer. Maybe it's because they're mental health advocates talking about mental health, so it's also kind of helps a bit. But I would like to say that I hope that it's because that I'm genuinely interested in their response, and I'm creating a space for them to answer with more than just, okay.
Yeah, that's something I'm trying to work on, because every guest that I've interviewed so far, they've been able to be authentic, but sometimes I feel like maybe I'm not doing enough to let them be authentic. And so, one of the things, and we talked about this beforehand, but trying to create a podcast where it's conversational as opposed to question and answer, because I did that before and I felt like maybe I wasn't connecting with the guests enough. But then now that I switched to this kind of format, I feel like I'm getting the best version, or I'm able to connect with the guests and let them know, hey, you can be a human being and talk about yourself, but it's still difficult. So, I will definitely look to your podcast in the future to figure out how to be more authentic, because I feel like I can always learn from fellow podcasters and support one another. I think, because I listen to other podcasts as well, but I feel like when I listen to people of the Gen Z generation and how close we are in terms of like the generation, I think you can definitely, I don't know, it helps me. I don't know if that's what you do. Like if you've listened to other podcasts that are hosted by Gen Zers, but what I found is like I have my podcast that I listen to, but then when I listen to like your podcast or other podcasts hosted by Gen Zers, I don't know, I just feel like I know exactly how to be a better host, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And I've been approached it that way, and maybe I should. I think for me, the way I approach it is people I admire and looking up what they're doing. So for me, a big one's Oprah, always has been, always will be. So watching any and every interview Oprah does, and just the way that she like nods her head or tilts her head or asks the question, the inflections in her voice, or the way she moves her hands, just paying a lot of attention to everything that she does and how the guest may respond and what makes that work for her. And then how do I find my unique things? How do I find the way that I nod my head and when I nod my head or when I turn my head or how much I'm going to touch my hair or whatever it is? Like all these things that make me me. How do I portray that in a respectful way to the guest and get to be myself? But I think for me, I use Oprah. Oprah's my go-to to learn from. And hopefully I'd like to say things, Oprah. If you ever hear me talk, I give you credit.
I asked this with almost, I think I've had maybe three or four guests on this podcast who have their own talk show or podcast. I don't think I've asked this question to everybody, but I do want to ask you because as a host, one of the most important things is to make sure that the things that you talk about hopefully inspire people. But I also want to make sure that the guest, like I'm trying to, I guess impress the guest in some sense. So for you, when you're interviewing people, do you ever feel like you have a point to prove them like you are a good host in some sense, or like when you're interacting with them, there's a sense of like you want to learn and get to know them, but at the same time going like, I hope they think I'm a good interviewer. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And I have to say, for me, I love to talk, absolutely love to talk, and I'm very confident in my ability to talk. So it's more for me is not like the idea of like I want them to think I'm a good host, as much as I want to have a fun conversation and I want to like add value to the conversation. So I think for me, those are like the main things that maybe go through my head. It's like, how can I add value? How can I be respectful and ask questions or lead the conversation in a way that allows for them to be authentic and vulnerable and explore however deeply they want to explore, whether it's they want to go really like into it and open up in such a like profound way, or whether they want it to be more, I don't want to say surface level because I don't think I've ever had a guest who's surface level, but who's more beneath the surface, but not all the way down. And like that's fine too. So creating an atmosphere or an environment where they feel like I'm respectful of them. I think that's for me. It's not like I want to impress anybody. Very confident in my ability to talk. I love to talk. I'll talk to myself all day long. But making sure that the people I'm speaking with always feel respected and valued and like I care.
No, that's really cool, and I think I've been trying to do that lately. But the only reason why I ask that is, I mean, I think most people have a good heart, but then sometimes they're like, maybe you're not good enough because for whatever reason. I don't know, man. I'm sure you probably have fell in this, have experienced this, but like I will almost every day, I will try to reach out to at least one person. And then there's always one email that will say, maybe, well, you're probably not that good, or no thanks because of whatever reason. And so podcast is it's like it's kind of what we talked about, like you're constantly learning, but then some people are like, well, you're not this type of podcaster, so why should we do this? And so sometimes it's like you got to ask every guest like, am I good enough? Like I love everything that we were talking about, but then at the same time, like, what did you think? Do you think I'm a good host? And so that's why I asked that question. It's not like in the sense of like I don't want to use guests as bait in any sense, but it's
Yeah.
like sometimes you'll get people that will make it personal and say like, well, because no one's heard about this podcast or because no one's heard about you, why should we take a chance? So that's why like that's what gives me anxiety is like after the end of each interview, I'm like, how did the episode really go? So that's why it's
I
like,
always,
that's why.
I always ask my guests after, how did you feel? Like, how did you feel? Did you feel like it was a good conversation? You got to say everything you wanted to? I always just give them this chance to tell me how they feel, not in a tell me how I did, but tell me how I made you feel, right? Because that's what it's all about, is how did we create a space for them to amplify their voices? So that's how I always like to frame it. It's how did you feel? And I think that when it comes to reaching out to people, you're gonna have so many people say no for like some of like the saddest reasons, like, oh, you don't have enough downloads every week. I have a lot more downloads than I did 3 years ago. I can tell you that. I have like 5,000 it. But do I have a significant amount compared to those famous talk show hosts? Absolutely not. Will I get there one day? I really, really hope so. But there's so many people who just, they want the wider platform and they don't want to be part of the buildup. That's a reflection of them and not you, right? Like that's on them. Like if you don't want to have a conversation with me, good for you. You don't have to. Like you don't have to talk to me. I don't have to talk to you if you don't want to. Totally okay. I get that. You do you, I'll do me. And being willing to accept that like not everyone's the right fit for you. And people may not say it in the nicest way. I reached out to someone who I really wanted to have on. I reached out to their managers gave me the information for the PR person, and the PR was like, no, just no. And they're like, no, sorry. Actually, I think was the email I got back. And I was like, oh, that really hurt because I wanted this person on. But like realistically, am I the right fit for that person? Probably not. They probably need someone with a bigger and wider platform, and that's fine too. So knowing that instead of taking it like as rejection, which is something I did in the beginning a lot, it's like if you don't want to have a conversation with me, cool. Like good for you. One day, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But like you do you and I'll do me. And we'll both add value in some way. Like that's cool.
It's like, yeah, why should I worry about what person A said? I'm interviewing Francesca Reicherter. Who cares?
Exactly.
Before I let you go, my last question is, and I was thinking about how would I word this, but you talked about how you are a very elaborative person, you're a very outgoing person, and you love to have fun on a podcast. So I want to ask you, because I was thinking about should I ask which one is more difficult, but let me ask it this way, and maybe we can cut it. But which one do you find more satisfying, being the host or being the guest? Because you love talking, you love adding value, but being the host and guest has its own set of pros and, or not pros and cons, but like has its own challenges. So for you, which one do you find to be the most in rewarding or not rewarding? I guess the most enjoyable.
I think it depends on the guest or the host, right? It depends on who I'm talking with, like to be completely honest. Sometimes I'm like, wow, I loved being a guest. Like that was so much fun. And sometimes I'm like, okay, like that was good. I wish it was a little different, but like that's good too. Like, or maybe our personalities just didn't build off each other. And like, okay, my personality's not gonna like build off everybody's. Sometimes I interview a podcast guest and I'm like, oh, that was good, but I wish we went deeper. I wish we explored more. I wish we bantered more or whatever. So I think that it really depends on the guest, and there's always room for enjoyment. And I think for me, it's accepting that not everyone has the same personality as me. Not everyone's going to show up in the same way I do. Not everyone's going to be as vulnerable as I'm willing to be. And that's them. And I can't change the way someone is or force them to be like me. I like to think that's what makes me unique. And that's what makes them unique, is who we are and how we show up as ourselves. So it depends. Like, there's not one that I prefer to the other. It's just who I'm talking to. And I love talking to people. So most of the time it's all very enjoyable.
That's fair. I can understand that. Um, yeah, I think it's funny because I've only been the host. I've never been the guest, so I'm really looking forward to that. But I'm also someone who likes to talk for a very long period of time. So that's what gives me a little bit of nerves. But I think, at the end of the day, don't focus too much on, I guess, don't worry too much. Just have fun at the moment. But yeah, I think that's the only thing we can take away is just whether you're the host or the guest, just have as much fun and try to add value to people's lives,
Yeah.
just like you are doing. So yeah, I don't know
I
if you want
think
to add on to that. Kind of interrupted you, but go ahead.
good. I think that when you show up as yourself and you just are yourself, like you get to have fun. Like you get to be you when you're not worried about putting a mask on or worried about how people perceive you and you're focused on just being you. I think that makes it a lot more fun and enjoyable. Like something I said during this podcast, I said it while speaking once. Sometimes I forget I'm like being recorded and I'll say things like, I don't run, just like my mouth. Like that's just a me thing to say. That is like the most authentic thing you're gonna hear me say. It's like, I don't run. I run my mouth and my credit card. That's it. Totally like accurate. So like don't be so focused on being filmed or being recorded in a sense of I want people to see me this way. I want to come across this way. Just like be you. Be you, have fun. Who you are is always going to be enough, whether or not you believe it. So just show up as yourself, and it's so much fun when you do, when you just get to be you.
That's a great way to end the conversation. And yeah, I think there's so much that you said that can really be beneficial, not just to podcasting or entrepreneurship, but just in life in general. So, Francesca, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for being such an amazing guest. And I wish you nothing but the best for your podcast. I will continue to listen. I don't know how many episodes I've listened to. I'm still well behind, but I'll catch up soon. But nevertheless, it was so great to meet you, and hopefully we can meet in person someday.
Thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun talking with you, and I can't wait to see all the amazing conversations you create.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.